All right, we're live. Hello, YouTube. Let me grab that YouTube link and then I will actually let me share my screen too. So I am not in my office. Clearly, I am. I've given my office over to my in-laws. So I am in my room. Okay, let me just update this.
You're probably getting good brownie
There we
points for
go.
that.
So yeah, feel free to join. I think that I need to fix my sound settings because I think that, I just had my volume turned down. I was like, I think somebody said something, I didn't hear him. So this is Office Hours. If you've never been here, welcome. Office Hours is your opportunity to ask me questions so that I can kind of consolidate all the question asking at one time and answer as many questions as possible so I can get other stuff done throughout the week. And it works out really well. People seem to like it. So you can join the Zoom. And there's the Zoom link there and ask me questions on the Zoom, or you can just come to the Discord in the KCD Office Hours channel and ask questions in here. And we do have a couple in here, but I always give priority to the people who are actually in the meeting. So Naresh, I know you have a question. Do you want to get us started?
Sure. So my first question is regarding the separation of concerns that I used to do using the presentation container component pattern. But it looks like lately people are kind of not doing that. For example, GraphQL basically says, write your queries right in your presentational components. And that kind of messes up testing and Storybook and all that kind of stuff because things are too tightly coupled there. And also Dan Abramo in his own article has kind of backed off of that and saying that, hey, I want to do all the container component stuff in my hooks. So hooks will be right there, right with your presentation stuff. And that's kind of, I don't know what is the new paradigm here. And
Yeah.
how do you do separation of concerns?
Yeah, I have quite a few thoughts on this. There was this thing going on just this week where people were saying React encourages putting your application logic inside your React components. And some people on the React team said, no, we don't. And I actually don't really, I don't know, maybe there's something weird about me, but I've never had a problem with this. Not that I've never struggled. What I mean is, I don't think it's a problem. I think it's totally fine. I have been involved in a lot of migrations, and every single time we were, there was no reason to copy paste application logic. It never made any sense when we migrate from one framework to another to do that. Even if we could, it wouldn't have been what we wanted to do anyway. So I struggle to see a great deal of value in separating that business logic from the UI.
So my question is not regarding business logic. I'm okay with putting logic inside my presentation components. It's when the component itself says, "Oh, I want to go fetch from a server," or I want to look at my URL right now, and I'll pick my ID from there and use that to fetch from server. To set up all that in a test or in Storybook becomes a pain in the neck.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I'll get to that too. So one of the reasons I like I said, I have a lot of thoughts on this. One of the reasons that that people really like to separate their application logic from their UI is for testing, to make it easier to test, and for stuff like Storybook. And so they say, well, you got to separate it, otherwise it's just a pain to test, as if that's like an axiom that we have to hold on to for life. And it's not. The reason that it's hard to test is maybe the way that we're testing or the tools that we're using just need to be improved so that they can handle that sort of thing. And so what I say is, how about instead of retrofitting the way that we build our applications to fit the constraints of our tools. Let's just use better tools or use our tools better. And so what I've done is I created React Testing Library so that you can add a wrapper component. And so if you need the router context to be available so that you can grab params or mock out what the params are, then you can do that with the wrapper with React Testing Library. If the component is making a network request, you can mock that out with MSW without any trouble. And eventually you are going to want to test that network request in some way, right? Maybe you'll do an end-to-end test, but you probably also want to have an integration test that mocks out those HTTP calls. And so whether you're doing that for the logical component or the presentational one, or like they're mixed or whatever, it doesn't make a difference. You're going to have to do the mocking at some point. And so if you're using a tool that just makes it really easy to do that, then there's not a whole lot of value in separating those two things in the first place. So you just use MSW to mock out network requests, and you can set that up with Storybook too. I haven't used Storybook very actively in a long time, so I'm not sure about the query parameters and how you'd mock that out in Storybook. I imagine it's possible. It would be very surprising to me if that wasn't possible, but that's an unanswered. I can't answer that particular point. But yeah, if we're using the right tools, then we don't have to separate these. And even back when Dan posted this blog post about smart and dumb components, or container and presentational components, I looked at that and was like, oh, all right, Dan, sure. I guess that maybe that is, I disagreed. I never agreed with the pattern. I never used it. And I never really struggled. The way that I think about, and actually, you know what? I've got a YouTube video about where I explain this, and I bet I can find it and I'll link you to it here really quick. Presentation. Yeah, what will happen to the container presenter pattern? I think this is the only place I ever talked about it, was when somebody asked me, okay, so now that we have hooks, how does this work with that pattern? And that's where I explained that I never use it. Yeah, now I forgot what this blog post I was gonna show you was. Rats. I was just talking about yeah, the container presenter pattern. I just never used it. Shoot, the blog post was gonna be great. I don't know what it was. Somebody
so MSW is great. That definitely, even in Storybook, has helped me to kind of do the network requests. I just pasted a small snippet here where I was not able to make it understand the routing, and I'm using the latest React Router 5. And from what I can see is you have to just sort of set the router initial entries to something that you want, and then you want to set your route to whatever the pattern is, and that should be enough to kind of get that in your component, but it's not coming in. And I think because that version is in beta, there is not enough written about it, how to go about doing those things.
Yeah. So this, as far as what I can see, it looks like it should work. So I can't tell you why it's not. But yeah, that seems like a pretty reasonable approach to this, because when we're testing, we actually have a location that we can mutate and manipulate and stuff for the test. And that's what I recommend when we're testing. You just use the regular React router. But for Storybook, you can't really do that because there is a real location. And so
exactly,
yeah, using the memory router, like I'm assuming that's what this is.
Yeah, that's a memory router.
Yeah. So doing that seems like the right approach. And I'm just not sure why this isn't working. So I would continue to pursue this.
Okay, good. Because in my unit tests, I was able to just mock use location and just make it believe it is working. But in Storybook, I wasn't able to do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Man, I just feel like there was something else I really wanted to say about this, because I just.
Yeah, but it's good to know your view on this, and like, okay, I can now maybe make it work and just get used to it.
Yeah, I'm sure there are plenty of people who strongly disagree with me that, I know what it was. So I have this blog post, when to break up a component into multiple components, and nowhere in here, well, so I think in here I may actually say testing is potentially one reason that you would break up components. So basically in this blog post, I say, let's just pretend that we put our entire application in a single React component, which is possible. You can do that. What are the problems that we would run into? And that's how you know when to break things up, is when you run into those problems. Otherwise, you just put everything into one component. It's a lot simpler when you do that, but you will run into these problems. And so my assertion is, until you run into one of these problems, just leave it all in one component. And testing is one of those, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, is what I say. Like if everything were in one component, 100% of your tests would be integration. Everything is integrated into one component, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if there are edge cases and stuff, then that can make sense to break things out into other components. Yeah, I never used the container presentation pattern. I never saw it to be very valuable. Yeah, so pursue that. And this is, please do come back and tell me if you hated it. But I've been doing this for years and I love it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so you asked another question about analyzing performance issues. Did you want to say anything more than what you have here?
Yeah, I mean, and the article that was recommended was good. I read that article and was very helpful. I think the major part of my question is, if I don't know the application well enough, and I'm doing all those state co-location things and all that, my question is more like, how do you actually interpret results from Chrome DevTools? Like in your article basically said, oh, I can see this thing is rendering, all the components are re-rendering. And you had so many insights, which I don't know how to actually get my arms around.
Yeah, totally. So for the performance tab here, interpreting this comes down to playing around with this a lot. So there's no shortcut for this. You just have to spend the time. And just as a tip, when you're scrolling in here, it zooms in and out. If you want to scroll up and down, then you hold the shift key. That bothered me so much until I figured that out. Yeah, and actually you can scroll side to side too. But anyway, yeah, it comes down to spending a lot of time in here, and knowing whether components re-rendered and stuff is actually pretty straightforward. I'll show you that really quick. So you can do let me bump the font size up here. You can hit the profiler tab, you hit this start profiling, you do your interaction, and then you stop. And here we can see each one of these bars represents a commit. And so we can see, and a commit is when React did at least one render and updated the DOM. That's what that means. And so, yeah, we've got our commit information over here. And we can, all the components that are colored are the ones that were rendered, whether or not they actually resulted in a DOM update. So those are two different things. So the render or the function body was actually executed is what the color means. And if it's gray, it means it didn't render, but it had children that did. If it's grayed with slashes, that means nothing in this tree rendered. So this component didn't render and none of its children did.
So where is the tree is starting at the app? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, yep. And so here we can look at our components. We see we've got our app, and then the slow form, the fast form, and then all of the inputs. And of course, you'll know this better when it's your own app. Yeah, so then we can see that the slow form did render. We can click on it and it'll just show that. And then we can click on this one and it'll show us all of these pieces. And it will give you how long this component took. And that's mostly an estimate, but it's pretty solid estimate of how long it took to render this component. But it's really important that you don't take this estimate as fact unless you are running in production mode without any Chrome extensions installed or running. So like you want to pull up incognito mode. You don't want to, well, React DevTools is the one exception because you can't do this without React DevTools. But yeah, you want to simulate the real user's experience as much as possible. And if you're running like I am with Code Sandbox, then the commits are still useful. It'll still show you what components were rendered. Just don't look at the number of milliseconds as like a surefire thing. This is what the user's experiencing, because it's not. It'll be a lot faster when it's not dev mode. But yeah, this is still can be really helpful in identifying, oh man, why are all these components re-rendering? I just interacted with that one. And so that's kind of how you know whether you're getting unnecessary re-renders, which may or may not be an actual problem. And then here, if we do the fast form, one of the reasons why fast form is so much faster is because we eliminate those unnecessary re-renders. But the real trick is how we eliminate those unnecessary re-renders. A lot of people will say, just react.memo everything. And that's what I'm trying to tell people. You don't have to do that in this blog post. If you follow the structure that I'm showing you here, then you don't have to worry about that. But anyway, the tricky part is this performance tab, and that really just comes down to playing with it a lot. If you have like a really simple app that's not using React, that can be a really good place to start playing around with this tool, because then you won't have so much framework code in here. I think actually they try to color things for framework code versus your own code, which is kind of cool. I don't know how they do that. But they do. So here we have our slow form is right here. So that's my component. And I can see that my component's calling use reducer and use state. It has this JSX with validation static, which I think is a dev tool or a dev time transform that React does. So if you did this in production mode, which when you're using the performance tab, you actually absolutely should be doing all of this. Well, you should be doing this with production mode, like the production build, and without any extensions running. And then the numbers will actually matter. Right here, the numbers don't matter because this is all dev.
And you said that the profiler tab cannot be done in production mode, right?
The profiler, so actually I've got a blog post that kind of explains this a little better. Profile a React app for performance. This is where I explain how you can effectively do what I just said. Profile a React app for performance. That was a waste of 5 seconds of your life. Sorry. So you can use the React DevTools in production mode, but you have to configure it properly, because React in production mode eliminates a ton of stuff so that it's as fast as possible. But one of the things that it eliminates is some of the hooks that the React DevTools uses to do its performance profiling. And so if you build it properly, and I show you how to do that in the blog post, then it will eliminate everything except for those critical things that it needs. And so it will be just marginally slower. And in Epic React, I teach you all about all of this stuff in the performance workshop. And I also show you how to do production performance monitoring. So we're reporting to our service, and then we can like put it up in Grafana or something, keep track of the performance of our app. And I know Facebook does this. And I think Netflix does this as well. And probably all of the big companies do this, where they will serve the performance profiled enabled version of React to a subset of their customers, so that for everybody it's fast except like this random subset, and so they can get production performance monitoring for them, but everybody else it's still lickety split fast. Technically, until you get to like that scale and where performance matters that much, you're probably fine just enabling profiling for everybody. But but that's an option if you want to get into the weeds of complexity there. But anyway, so playing around with this is, I think it's a great idea. And as like there's more to this too. Like you can actually click on these, and if you get rid of our console here, there we go. So it'll give you a summary of what happened, like what it spent so much time doing. You can look at the function calls that were made in here, and here we see render with hooks, and there's a lot of React stuff going on in here, and you can see what took the most amount of time. And here's our penalty component again. Where is that? Huh, that's odd. I don't know why there are two of those, but yeah, and then we have our call tree. So this particular function that was called, this is how we got to that function, focus out. And so like over time, you get kind of experience, you get an idea of what each of these means. And I'm pretty sure that the Chrome DevTools team has a very comprehensive blog post about this that I feel like I just saw recently. So if somebody wants to look that up and share a link, you totally can. But yeah, I'm afraid it's mostly a matter of developing experience playing around with this tool.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, sure thing. Okay, sweet. Let's see. Did you have any other questions?
I had one that I had asked last week, which was, your view on what's the new framework you're using?
Remix.
Remix versus, people are gung-ho about Next.js also, and other frameworks that are coming in, like PX server components and all that. So where do you kind of place all those things?
Yeah, I mean, we could spend the next half hour, or the rest of our half hour talking about how much I love Remix. So I will first say that I haven't used Next.js in quite some time. And so my like what I can offer you by way of comparison is pretty limited because for that reason. This site is built with Gatsby, and so I can tell you what I don't like about Gatsby, and most of it revolves around the fact that it's static site generation, which Next can do, but it also does server-side rendering. So I'm pretty much totally done with SSG for any serious projects that I do. But yeah, Next does SSR too. So what makes Remix special? So many things. So I really need to start thinking about how to articulate the things that I love about Remix in a proper narrative, so that I don't waste a lot of time. But basically, I love that Remix has an enormous focus on leaning on the existing solutions that we've had for decades now with browsers. So they really lean into focusing on request response and headers, and it's for anybody. I was not a developer in the PHP days where you have just like the single file that you put on a server, and then a request comes in and that file runs and it sends things back, and you've got like all of your everything in that file. I think for me, when we're talking about separation of concerns, the concern is the page. And so I love being able to just put everything right there. And that is the concern, is like getting this page rendered for that user or served up for that user. And so in my Remix module, I have a loader in there that runs server side, and it only runs server side. I've got my action in there that responds to any form posts that need to be made. I've got my default export, which is the React elements that are rendered, and that's client and server side code. I've got an error boundary. Pretty soon they'll have a pending. So what's super cool about this is because they have nested layouts, a user can come to your page and you can say, hey, this particular component in here just takes a really long time to get its data. So I'm going to say, let's just go pending with this. And instead of rendering my actual component, I'll render this pending UI, which can render its children. So you can have a parent that has parts of it that are spinners, but then the children all render like usual with server rendered and stuff, which is very, very cool, very interesting, and it has really cool implications with nested routing. And Remix is the only game in town for nested routing. Anybody who's worked with either Gatsby or Next.js is very familiar with the dreaded layout component that you have to render on every single page. I hate it so much. And
you mean the outlet thing, right? In the nested routing?
Yeah, yep. They because they support nested routing, you have this outlet that you can, and it's not just like on the parent route, but also like on any route inside of there. So every slash.
Yeah, I use that. It's pretty nice.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah. And because of that, they also have the ability to, on the initial document load, run all of your loaders in parallel. So there's no waterfall there, and that happens server side. But then for client transitions, if you go, let's say that you've got a master detail and you've got your list of emails right here, and you click on one. So we load this email, and then you click on another. Because you're not changing anything on this list, you're just changing the route, like the nested route of that detail for that email. You don't have to go and re-request all of the stuff for that email list. You just request the stuff for this. And what's cool about, to make it even cooler, is I don't have to worry about managing that. I just write my components that say, this is what is required if the user lands on this page. Like they make a document request to get this page. And then Remix just optimizes it really well so that it works nicely for client-side transitions too. So I don't have to worry about, oh, do I need to go get that list? If the user is doing a client-side transition, I already have that data. But Remix manages all of that for me, which is really cool. I also love the CSS solution from Remix. So we have so many solutions for the problems of CSS. There's all the CSS and JS and everything, and Tailwind and everything. With Remix, so many of those problems are eliminated because what they do, it's so simple. I just don't understand why I never thought of it. But with every single one of your route modules, you can export a meta function and a links function. And so these are like meta tags for title and stuff. And so that's actually pretty cool. So everybody else is using React Helmet, which does some funny trickery to insert stuff into the head. With Remix there, you are in control of rendering the meta and headers and the links. And so you don't have to do the React Helmet stuff. But your route modules get to say, on this route, here is the meta, and here are the links that I want to have on the page. And so because of that, you can say import a CSS file. And when you import in Remix, when you import a CSS file, what you're getting is a URL to the file that goes into your public directory. And so then you take that URL and you export it as part of the links. And so and a link tag is how you get CSS on the page. And so then you say, I'm going to have this CSS on the page or like this CSS file on the page for this route. And what makes it really magical is that when you get to that route is when the CSS loads. So we don't have to worry about putting all of our CSS in one thing and then putting it on the page and then having 90% unused CSS, which is, this is not made up. That's what it was at PayPal. And it was one of the last things that I really focused on trying to fix before I left. It's a huge problem. So you don't have to worry about that. The CSS comes when it needs to come. But the real key is that it also leaves when it needs to leave. So if you navigate from this page to a completely different one, that route goes away. Not only does the route go away, but the CSS link tags also go away. And so what that means is that all of the CSS goes away with it. And so I could have a rule in my CSS that says span tags are red for this route. And then I could have another rule for this other route that says span tags are blue. And these would not clash. They won't clash because they'll never be on the page at the same time. They're totally different routes. And so what's really cool about this is I can leverage with CSS and JS, we just say, you know what, the cascade is a disaster. We have conflicts all the time. Let's just get rid of the cascade entirely by having these hashed classes. And now we'll never run into conflicts. And what Remix says is, no, the cascade can be really nice. It can be helpful, and we'll use that. But we will make it so that different pages that have different CSS rules won't clash with each other. And all of a sudden, so many of the problems of CSS are eliminated. So I have zero interest in using CSS and JS with Remix. I don't know why I would do that. I'm like this close to deciding I don't want Tailwind either. The only reason that Tailwind is still pretty interesting is just because it's really fast for iterating on a design, and I don't have to worry about
writing any CSS.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, eventually, even with Tailwind, you do end up having to write some, but yeah, I'm really close to just deciding now I don't need Tailwind either. I'll just write regular CSS, and that is huge. That is huge because you have to know about regular CSS to do any of these other solutions, and then you also have to know about the solution. Where if all I need is regular CSS, and that's an enormous amount of complexity I just can eliminate. So I'm still deciding the Tailwind thing, because Tailwind can be quite nice, especially when you're working on a team and you want some consistency and stuff. But you can kind of build that yourself because of the nested routes support. So
one just follow-up question on that would be so Next.js, what it does is pre-fetching. So if there are links on a page, it'll pre-fetch the links for you, which makes the page transitions really fast. Does this thing also, Remix, have something equivalent?
Yeah, yep, Remix has this as well. In fact, I don't know if they announced this publicly. I don't know if I should say this, but the Remix docs are publicly available. They told me not to say anything, but that was like a month or two ago. I think that was before they released their 1.0, which ended up being like V17, I think. but yeah, it's their beta, 1.0 beta, I think is what it is. But anyway, if we look at the is it application module? No. Where is it? Maybe this is it. Yeah, route module API, that's what it is. So we've got our component, we've got our loader. We've talked about all this stuff. Yeah, I love response status codes. That's nice that I can control those status codes. Can't do that with Gatsby. It's a 200, but the page says it's a 404. What? Yeah, SEO loves that so much. Yeah, and then we've got our action. So for mutations and stuff. Oh yeah, there's our headers. So you can define what headers you want set on the request for document request for the page, which can be really nice for you get control over cache headers and stuff, which is really great. And let's see. Yeah, then we talked about the meta, the links, and the links is what I wanted to talk about here. Yeah, so actually they have this block utility to say, hey, don't finish loading this transition until this image has been loaded. And so you can do that preload. And Remix actually does this by itself, where it will preload all of it uses native VSM in the browser. And so the problem with native VSM is that there's a waterfall effect. You load this module and then it has dependencies. And so once it's been parsed, it's like, oh, you need this, let me go get those three things. And then they come and they each have different things. So we have this waterfall. And so Remix automatically does this, and it adds a bunch of link tags that preload all of those modules. So there's no waterfall. But the thing I wanted to talk about specifically was, yeah, here it is right here. So you can also in your links, you can export or add a page. Here, let me bump that up a little bit. You can add a page that says, I want you to preload everything that this page needs as well. And so that's not only the page code itself, but also anything that it defines as blocking. I haven't tested this, but I'm pretty sure that's what it does. Everything that it says is blocking, it will also preload all of that. So yeah, transitions can be fast. Next does this automatically, and maybe they have a way to opt out for certain things. But this, I actually had to turn that off for Gatsby because loading my initial page, my home page, just resulted in downloading a ton of stuff. And I didn't want to do that to my users. And loading my blog page, that's 181 blogs, 181 blog posts that we're downloading for users. You are not going to read all of those. So I had to opt out of that. So I actually really like that Remix gives you this really clean way to opt into that behavior. So yeah, and actually I think this also will preload the data as well. So it'll call the loaders and everything. So that transition is really fast. So yeah, and then you've got your error boundary. You've got this handle thing. It's pretty interesting. This is kind of like their bucket of what did we miss? you put whatever you want on this handle, which allows us to do some pretty interesting things like selective hydration is one where you can say, you know what, this page does not need to have JavaScript on it. It's my terms of service. I'm not doing anything with this. Like there's no JavaScript here. And so you could add a handle that says hydrate false. And then in your root component, you say if hydrate is false, then don't render the script component, which renders all of our scripts. And so then there's no JavaScript on the page for that. It's very simple. So anyway, really cool stuff. Sorry, my son is walking in. 1 second. All right, so I just noticed that we've got a couple of chats in here. I think that Presti, are you still here? I think you're gone. Had to drop out. Oh, they're just being nice. And Darius has strong opinions, but keeping them to himself. So I don't know what those were, Darius. Okay. Anybody else in the Zoom have a question? I could go on and on and on about Remix. It's been amazing to use Remix. I'm really, really happy with it. And I can't wait till I finally ship my rewritten website. I'm still, you can see it right now. It's kent.dev, but I haven't gotten to the point where we're actually like making it look nice yet. But we're going to get there, and it's going to be so cool. I can't wait for you all to see what we've got coming. So anyway, yeah, anybody else in the Zoom have a question before I jump to this question here?
I can.
Hi.
So I just wanted to know you mentioned that Tailwind helps bringing consistency in the team. So I just wanted to know how that will help.
Yeah, so you get consistency by constraints. CSS, you can do anything that you want. And so I could say a margin, like on this page, the width margin is auto and the width is 1080px, something like that. But then somebody else on a different team or who's maybe on the same team, just on a different page, they say it's 1200px for their page. And so you're lacking consistency there, or maybe whatever the case may be, because you have all the power of CSS. With Tailwind, they constrain the number of things that, or the number of values that you can have. And so it's either, and I'm pretty limited in my experience with Tailwind, but you have specific widths that you can choose from. And so you're not going to have like 30 different widths for different things. And then the same with colors, like pretty much at every company that I've worked at, we had a lot of variants of the same color just copied throughout the code base and then modified slightly because somebody thought it looked funny or whatever. And the same with padding. And designers are like the same way, where I would get a design from one designer and the margin between the form fields was one thing, and then a design from a different designer for a different field where the margin was a little bit bigger, and like they just have different opinions. And if they are not constrained in the widths and heights that they use, then that will show in their designs that they give us. But if we as developers are using Tailwind, then and we're focused on just like, let's just use Tailwind, try to avoid doing one-off stuff. Then we'll look at that and we'll say, they said 12 pixels, but my Tailwind thing is 14. I'm just going to go with the Tailwind thing. And everybody, the next person with another design says, they said 16 pixels, but Tailwind is 14. So I'm just going to go with what Tailwind says. And so we're all going to be consistent. So that's one of the nice things that Tailwind offers, is that it gives you just an enormous collection of constraints, so that you can have consistency throughout the look and feel of your page. And so that's the primary reason why I'm still kind of considering using Tailwind.
Yeah, but with JIT, this all goes away because you put anything in square brackets, and that comes out as a color or anything. So yeah, I felt because of JIT with the Tailwind, you kind of lose that constraints which you have.
I suppose that's true if that becomes a common practice in your team to just do one-off things. But I would, I guess that's something that you could instruct during code reviews, where you say, hey, I noticed that you're leveraging JIT to do this, to do this one-off, but I think it'd be better if you just use the things that are built in if you can. So yeah, but the fact that it exists means it's more likely to be used. And this is both a problem and it's a blessing and a curse in software development. Is if something exists, we'll use it rather than making our own thing most of the time, which is why sometimes abstractions get really complicated, because if it exists, we'll use it. But if it doesn't quite match our use case, then we'll change it, and then it gets really complicated. But I think in the case of Tailwind, it's like, oh, this is a couple pixels off from what I want, but I'm just going to use it because it exists. So, but no, that's a good point on those the cool things. Like, it really is kind of cool what they did with JIT. But yeah, I think that mostly we should be okay. With having some consistency. But like I said, Remix just eliminates so many problems for me. It's really hard to say I want to do more than just regular CSS. What I think I'd like to do, one of the reasons that I would at least add post CSS in front of it would be for auto prefixer, but I'm actually thinking I'd rather just put a linter in place that tells me if I need to prefix a value. And I just do just real CSS, no processing at all, because I just don't think that I need it with Remix. But this is clearly, this is one area that I haven't done much of yet on my site. So there's that.
So even with, if you just go with pure CSS, would you use something like BEM to avoid name collisions within a page, or no?
I don't know. I'm not sure. So BEM is mostly useful when I'm working on this page and I'm going to make some changes to this thing, and I'm not sure what impact that's going to have on other pages. But if I am working on this page and I'm writing some CSS, I know that every change that I have, I will see that change, see the impact of that change. And I know that there will be no other impacts anywhere else. That is very unique. I've never seen anything else do that before. And it's not, I don't know, it's so simple. Just remove the link tag. It's just like, wow, why is that so obvious? It's just so funny. So yeah, I don't think that I would use BEM, honestly. I would probably, Yeah, I'd probably just use regular class names. Yeah. I keep getting chats in the Zoom. I like to try and keep chats in Discord. That way everybody else can see it too. But Darius is saying, I think using compositional approach when using vanilla CSS is better approach. So your own home baked to less granular version of Tailwind. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking too. And you know what? Before I was using Atomic CSS before it was cool. So back in like 2014, when I was still in school, I was working on this this social media app. I was going to build my own like Facebook thing. It was really cool. It's called Bucket Streams, and it was basically like you had different buckets that you could post things in. So if you're a car person, you can have a car bucket. It's kind of like Pinterest, actually. It's very similar to Pinterest, but I wasn't into Pinterest at the time, so I thought it was really unique. Where you can subscribe to an entire person and see everything that they post, or just the particular buckets. And then you can have different streams, and you say, I want their bucket to go in this stream. I've got a car stream, and just get all the car buckets from a bunch of people. And now I have one place where I can see all the cool things about cars. It was really a cool thing, and I had it built, and I was even like importing people's posts from Twitter and Facebook, you know, because they're network externalities. Nobody wants to use the thing nobody's using. It was cool. But anyway, on that project, I was using Stylus, and one of the reasons I chose Stylus was because it has a really great way for iterating. And so I iterated over extra small all the way to 4XL on margin and padding and font size and all sorts of different things for just to generate all these class names that I could just use anywhere, and it was awesome. So I really like the atomic class name approach. I've always really liked that, and so I don't have any problem hand rolling my own sort of thing like that. If it comes to it, I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to be working with somebody on this, and I will allow them to help me decide what I want to do there. Yeah. Okay, cool. Other questions? Let me get to this question here. So Edison is asking, since we were talking about Remix, how does it fare with the concept of micro front end? Does it support something like Webpack 5 module federation? Yeah, so I don't think that it does, and I don't know if it ever will. Yeah, I mean, I can't think of a reason why you couldn't make it work, but my thought is that Remix is definitely in control of your routes, and so Remix could be one of the apps within your micro front end architecture. And so your micro front end routes over to a Remix app. But I don't think that Remix could be at the top level. And then you use, yeah, I don't know enough about micro front ends. I always thought they were more complex than they needed to be. Sorry, let me say that differently. They solve a real problem that most people don't have. Sorry, let me say that differently. It's an enormous cost of complexity that I get the feeling a lot of people are paying without getting enough benefit to offset the cost. That's what I mean. So yeah, and module federation, I kind of feel is the same way. Like, it solves a real problem. It's not a fake problem. It's a real problem. And we had this problem at PayPal. So if you go to paypal.com and you go navigate around, you'll notice sometimes it does a client-side transition, and sometimes it does this whole server-side transition. And when you go server-side, that's because you're moving from one React app to another, and they're totally separate. That's a problem, right? Like, it's not great. They're using different versions of React. You're downloading a bunch of stuff over and over again. But PayPal is a pretty big business, and they're making lots of money. So clearly it's not that big of a problem that it's impacting or that it's making it impossible for them to be profitable. And it would just be just a ridiculous amount of effort to get all of PayPal on a single SPA micro front-end architecture. That would just be so complex. So I absolutely wouldn't recommend PayPal to do that. No way. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not super interested in that personally. I think that Remix has the potential to like it. I don't know. I was going to say, I think that Remix could do all of PayPal.com, and it certainly would be capable of doing that. But from an organization standpoint, there are so many teams at PayPal. It would be so difficult to get them all on board to using the same version of React. And you have one package JSON for the whole company. No, thank you. That just would not fly. So yeah, I don't know if Remix is going to be the solution that would do like all of PayPal. And I don't know if that's what they are targeting necessarily. And frankly, I think that it's fine to have separate apps. I do. And if you want to make it so that you keep the same version of React, like keeps the same big dependencies. One thing we were going to do at PayPal, and just never got around to it before I left, was I was going to fork Unpackage and do our own deployment of Unpackage within PayPal. And then you wouldn't have to coordinate versions. You just say, here's my version, go get it from PayPal Unpackage. And if we both happen to be using the same version of React, sweet. Then we get our caching. And so that's nice. Otherwise, like I made him download another version of React. It's not great, but the cost associated to avoiding that problem is so high that it's not worth the benefit. So anyway, everybody's situation is different, but that's just from my experience. I just don't think that micro front ends are advisable for most people. I just don't. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, hopefully that answers your question. Yeah. Did I ever try protected routes in Next without using get server side props? So I've never use protected routes in Next. And the only time I use Next is for glamorous.rocks. And this actually was deployed like 3 or 4 years ago, was the last time this got a deploy, because something in the build broke and I wasn't able to even redeploy this enough to say, this is no longer maintained. So yeah, something busted and I didn't have the time to figure it out. So it has been a long time, and this is statically generated site. So there's no server running here. So get server side props isn't a thing for me. So I don't have any experience with Next. I bet you could get some help from folks in the React channel or something. Yeah, so I don't have much. Actually, if you're talking about static side stuff and we're talking about authentication, then I do have a blog post about how I do authentication in a static context. So hopefully that sort of helps. Yeah. We could use memo and use callback. Oh, yeah. So yeah, you can use callback is just a small helper over use memo. That's what that is. Yep, you got it. So cool. Any other questions? We've got 4 minutes left. I'm happy to stick around to answer other questions.
React server components when we are on the same framework topic.
Sorry, say that again.
React server components.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so
what do you think?
I remember when I first heard of the concept of server components, and I just remember feeling very strange about it, because I was like, I should be really excited about this, but I don't really like, and it is interesting, it's cool, but Remix has solved so many of my problems that I don't feel like I need it that much. Like seriously, I'm not joking. Like this, just this loader thing alone. Where is it? Loader. Right here, where I can do my fetch stuff in here. I don't use effect with fetch, or I don't need React query. I just do all my stuff in here. I don't need GraphQL. a big reason a lot of people use GraphQL is to eliminate the amount of data that they're sending over the wire. Well, the loader runs server side, so I go get all the data. Who cares how much it is? It's on my server, and then I just pick out the stuff that I need in my component, which is in the same file, mind you, and I can put TypeScript typings on here, and I just send the data that I need. And so, like, I don't need GraphQL for that. And so, yeah, when we're talking about server components, a lot of it is, okay, so I've got this library that I'm using that's a really heavy library. And so I can run it server side instead. And so I'll just run it server side and then send the results, the resulting React elements, or like some representation of those things, back to the client. So then I don't have to send that big library over or do that heavy computation or whatever. So
but
that
part, loader, don't you have to hydrate it on the client side, especially if we need interactivity?
Yeah, exactly. So that's why that part is one of the cool parts of server components, and something that can bring me a lot of additional benefit beyond what Remix gives me, is that if I do have a heavy computation that is like for the UI, or I do have a big library or something that I need for the UI, that I can do that in a server context and then just send the resulting React elements over. But there are a lot of pretty significant constraints on server components. Like if I can't remember all of the constraints because I saw them. I'm like, oh, that'll be cool when Remix adds that. But I'm not like begging for it. So I haven't dived super deep into server components, but if I remember right, there you can either not use any client components in a server component tree. Like once you start server component, everything below it has to also be server component, or vice versa. I'm pretty sure it's once you get a server component, nothing below it can be client, which is a pretty heavy constraint, honestly, and kind of unfortunate. Yeah, so anyway, server components, that would be cool. Remix will be able to make good use of them. And what's cool is that Remix will make it possible to do automatically. So I won't even have to do anything. I'll just like, if it can benefit from the server component API, then it will use that. Like if there's no interactivity or something. No, I think if there's no use effect and stuff like that. Like I said, I don't know enough about it because I only care a little bit. Yeah, Remix just solves so many problems. I don't care about things as much as I used to. So, awesome. Yeah. I promise Remix is not paying me. I paid $250 to have access to this thing. I make $0 telling you all how awesome it is. I actually, the other day on 3 Minutes with Kent, I talked a little bit about the nuance of promotion. And I was kind of thinking about, I actually was thinking about something completely different. It was Workday, the CEO of Workday made a blog post or something where he said, you can tell the employees who are really engaged by those who want to come back to the office. Like, okay, Mr. I sell like shared workspaces for my company. Like, it's so obviously a conflict of interest. I understand. But then I stepped back and I'm like, no, wait a second. Like maybe he really is convicted. Like he just really believes that so much that he decided to start a company on that because he just believes it so much. And so like, maybe he's not just saying that because his company does that, but he really believes it. And that's why he started a company in the first place. And we can't really know for sure. And this applies to how much I love Remix as well. So maybe I'm just telling you that I love Remix so much because I'm planning on making a course and I want you to take it. Or maybe I love Remix so much, and so I'm going to make a course about it. And I tell you because I just love it. Like, so you can't really know. And you can, I guess if you want to, you can believe me or disbelieve me. I don't care. But that's,
I believe you can. That's why we are here.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I think Remix is the best way to build React apps. And that's why in the future, I'm going to be teaching people how to build Remix apps because I think it's the best way. So anyway, that's that. Okay, so question here. Do you advise using use memo with context provider to potentially avoid re-renders? Yeah, potentially. So I have a blog post about context. So how to use context effectively and how to optimize your context value. Both of these will be relevant here. The interesting thing is that you totally can memorize it and it's probably fine, but you may not ever benefit from that. So let's say that the context provider is the topmost component of your app. There is no way for that to re-render unless one of those context values changes. And so do you need to memorize? No, because every single time, if it changes, then the memoization is broken and it'll re-render everything. So if it's a very top component, there's no possible way for this to re-render unless the value actually changes, then no, you don't need to memorize it. You won't get any benefit. So yeah, understanding the how things work will help you decide whether or not it's necessary. Now, if you just want to make a rule that's easy to follow, then sure, just memorize it. But it does add complexity. So keep that in mind.
Okay, while you're on that topic of that article, I read that. The example you use is the use reducer example, where in the context you keep the state and the dispatch methods. Now, if we were to use state instead of use reducer, do you put the setter and the getter both in the one context, or I usually nest the contexts, one for setter and one for the getter?
Yeah, so I can't remember, is it this one where I do that? I actually,
you do that, and I read your context effectively and I couldn't find it anymore.
Yeah, I actually changed it recently because I felt like it was overly dogmatic.
Okay.
Because there are only certain situations where you actually benefit. Yeah, here we go.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
So let's say that you only have you have this context provider and there are like 6 components that use it, and every one of those components use both the state value and the dispatch or the state updater function. In that case, then all of them are going to be consuming both of these contexts, and there was no reason to separate them in the first place, because the only reason that you separate them is so that consumers of the updater don't have to re-render when the value changes. And then even still, it's still not totally necessary unless you have some sort of performance problem, where, oh, this component re-rendered unnecessarily because it doesn't actually care about the state value, and that led to some performance problem. So this is a premature optimization most of the time, and I would recommend against just going for this because as like a standard procedure.
So what you're saying is that if I put, even when I'm using a use state, if I put the setter and getter in the same context, it's not going to re-render components that are using only the setter. If somebody sets the context, is it not going to re-render all the components, whether they use both or not?
So let me be clear. Whether this is use state or use reducer is irrelevant.
Okay.
The state value will, when the state changes, the state value will always change, but the updater itself will not. It will this stays stable. And so if you want to make it so that consumers who only use the dispatch will not re-render, then that's when you separate the two. Because the consumers who use the value will always re-render when that value changes. And then consumers who only use the dispatch will not re-render when that value changes.
And that's a rare case because the people who are doing dispatch, they will use the state to kind of recompose it, right?
Well, yeah, most of the time there aren't a whole lot of situations where you only care about dispatch. Most of the time you need both.
Yeah. Okay, got it. Yeah,
so,
thank you for that.
And in this blog post, I have this big note like, you only need to worry about this for these situations. So yeah, otherwise, like don't bother doing this optimization. Part of me feels like I shouldn't have written this one because I feel like there are a lot of people who are doing this without really understanding that. And I teach this in the performance workshop of Epic React, but in that context, I have a lot more time to demonstrate when this is useful. So
got it.
I tried to with a little GIF. So yeah, cool. That's fun. Are loaders like get server-side props? I think so. That I don't know enough about Next to know, but I think so. There are plenty of people in here. You know what? I'm gonna ask this in the Remix Discord, and I will post it in here regarding. And actually, I'll rephrase this just a little bit. How are loaders different from server-side props? Okay, and I'll let you know what they say. Sweet. Oh, you're a shill. No, Darius, you're not. You just talk about the things that you like. Goodness gracious, that's the thing. Like, somebody called Wes Boss a grifter. Like, what is wrong with you people? Just because he's selling something, he's a grifter? Like, what? This is so stupid. Yeah, I don't understand it. Yeah, okay, so I do have a lot of blog posts, yes. Let's see, Marcos.
Hello, Kent.
Yes, oh, there you are, hi.
Yeah, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Doing great. I just shared a very contrived example of something I've been trying to achieve for a while, and I really don't know how to proceed. And this is actually super contrived, and I'm trying to use composition for a very different use case, but I thought this was like a minimal reproduction example that maybe could ring some bell on you, and you could maybe guide me towards the right direction. Maybe composition is not the right thing for this, or maybe, I don't know. Okay. Let's see. So you see this very dummy at the moment form, which essentially just is a bunch of inputs, right?
Yeah.
And these inputs, I would love to be able to access my siblings as an input in order to, maybe set my disability based on the value of other inputs. Maybe I only want to enable this input if all the previous ones have been already have a value or something around those lines. Does it make sense? Do you understand like the issue itself? Right.
Yeah. So hopefully this suggestion applies to your real scenario, but one thing that you could do is this input, once it's rendered, will have a reference to the form. And so if you put a ref on this, and then in a use effect, you say ref.current.form, that will get access to the form. And then the form has all of the elements. And so then you can look at all the elements and see if any of them have field values and, or whatever, and then set state within this input component based on those field values. Does that maybe help?
That is a perfectly valid solution, but I was wondering if there was some way where each input could set its own value into some kind of data structure that was then stored by the provider, by the context, and then it could be shared across context. Would that be a good thing to do? Would that be a terrible thing to do?
So I've definitely done component registration before. I did this with downshift, where it where the component registers itself on the parent. The way I did that was with prop getters, and it works. I'm not sure I super advise it, but I don't know, like people use downshift and love it. So Yeah, let's think. Yeah, what I did was the prop getter, when you call it, it will call, or it will just append that form field, or sorry, it's an item in downshift. You have this autocomplete, and these items are registering themselves. And so it would just call this or add itself to an array, so that I knew all of the items that were rendered. That actually worked out pretty well, but technically it's running in render. Yeah, I remember Andrew said, "Hey, Kent, this isn't concurrent mode safe," and I said, "Ship concurrent mode, and then I'll care." So,
oh, right. Okay.
yeah. But if you were able to do sort of the same thing just inside of a use effect, then it would be concurrent mode safe. And so, or a use layout effect if necessary. And so, yeah, you could put a React use effect and then just say, hey, I'm here, register myself with the context provider, with whatever you need it to be registered. Now, if it's just literally the values of the forms.
No, this is super contrived again.
Okay. Yeah. So what I was going to say is you could just control all the inputs, and then store the state in the form. But that sometimes you just need to watch out for performance problems in that situation, because as the user is typing, that could be a problem. But yeah, I don't know. Does that help answer your question?
Absolutely, it does. I was very reticent to do it because I had never seen something along these lines, like component registration or like registering themselves. I don't think I hate it, but like, what do I know anyway? So I don't know. It was helpful. Like, thank you.
I have mixed feelings about the whole thing too, but Downshift does it and it seems to work. So yeah.
Does it do it through props getting though? Like props getter or something?
Yeah, if we do,
could be helpful.
I'll show you exactly what it does. So they've got hooks now and everything is awesome. I haven't maintained this in a very long time. But man, this is my code right there. Like I wrote all this stuff. Oh my goodness. It's crazy to see this stuff again. Okay, where are we? So yeah, here's our this is all class component. This is a long time ago. Here's our render. We get our children. I called this .clear items, which I think just empties an array or something. And then I have all of this state. Like this is all super not concurrent mode safe. And the reason for that is in concurrent mode, and you probably know this, but just for everybody, in concurrent mode, React can render or can call your render method or call your component function to get the React elements and that's all that it's trying to do. Get React elements, and I guess like register use effect callbacks and stuff. And then before it actually updates the DOM or even does the diff, an event can come in that's high priority, and React says, you know what? I could keep going with this rendering that I'm doing, but actually this event is more important than that. So I'm going to throw this away, and I'm going to handle this event, and then I'll come back and I'll continue my work. And so in concurrent mode, if it ever gets released, we could actually end up calling this again, which could be a problem. It's really hard to think about the situations where that could be a problem. And it would be very difficult to reproduce and very difficult to debug. So we want to stay concurrent mode safe. And what that means is keep your render functions or your function components idempotent, which is a word that basically means you can call it a million times and it doesn't change what it does. That doesn't mean that it's a pure function. It just means that it does the same thing every time that it's called. Given certain inputs. I don't really understand it well enough myself to explain it. So anyway, the one problem I can think of is here I'm clearing this out, but if I had a statement up here that said, if this dot get root props dot called, then do this thing, otherwise do this other thing. Well, now I'm setting it to something else. If that render was thrown away, now I'm going to do something else this time. So that's one situation where concurrent mode could mess this up. Anyway, it's not concurrent mode yet, so who cares? So what I end up doing is I clear all of, yeah, actually, I think what we want to look at is this clear items function, actually. So there it is. This dot items equals this array. And then this is where the registration happens in get item props. So every single one of the items that you're rendering, these are the items that you can select in the dropdown. When you render those items, you're going to call get item props to get the props you need to apply to the item so that it works with all the events and stuff. And one of the things that it does is it takes the item, so it's not registering a component or anything. It's actually registering the item that will be selected when the user selects that, that line item. And so, yeah, we're pushing all of these items on the array as people call get item props. And this will control what index it is. So as the user's key, using the keyboard to go down, 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 that's how it knows when I'm highlighting index 2, now I'll look in this dot items at index 2, and now I know what item they selected. That's how that works.
Lovely.
So anyway, that's, yeah. And then for virtual scrolling, we also have the ability for people to provide what index this is going to be rather than deriving that off of the items pushing. And then we just push or set that based on the index that they provide. So that's for virtual scrolling, because you may be calling, this may be the first item that's calling get item props, but if we're in a virtual list, it could be actually item 110. And so we provide index 110, and now this dot items is an array that starts at 110 at index 110, and then it's just undefined values before then. So anyway, so that's how all that works. And so, yeah, component registration inside of a use effect, I think that would eliminate the problem with concurrent mode. So you wouldn't have to worry about that if you do it in a use effect, because once use effect happens, you know it was committed. And that's really where those sorts of side effects should happen. So if you can manage to make it work in a use effect, that's best. And yeah, I started Downshift as a collection of compound components, and I did item registration into a context value with that start. And actually, I don't know if this would be useful or interesting, but I live streamed building Downshift, and I don't know if, yeah, oh no, no, I didn't. That's if we look for Downshift, man, I live streamed Downshift a lot. Huh. Oh, and this isn't in order.
I can look for it myself.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
yeah, like there are 2 live streams that were the first 2 days of me working on what would become Downshift. I think I called it React Auto Completely at one point, and it was called React Cadabra at another point. Yeah, anyway, you can go look that up, and you can see how I did component. It was component registration with a context provider. This was all with classes. And you can see what problems I ran into. Maybe that'll be helpful.
Sure thing. Thanks a lot, as always. You're my life savior.
Well, not quite. But thank you.
No, really, the job you do is amazing. I know you know it, but just wanted to point it out again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcos.
See you.
Yep. So Yago says, so like register in React hook form. I've never used React hook form. So that might be another thing to look at, Marcos. It sounds like maybe they do some sort of registration thing as well. So, okay, cool.
We'll give that a look too. Thanks.
Cool. I have gone over my time. I've just been having too much fun. So I've got to run. Thanks for hanging out. This was fun, and look forward to office hours next week. Same time, same place. Well, I'll be in a different place. I'll be in my office instead of my room. And I actually did put a bunch of the days that I'm not going to be holding office hours, as far as I know, for the rest of the year. So yeah, but it looks like I didn't cancel next week. I should be here. So yeah, thanks everybody. We'll see you